Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with special guest Ann Mah, and she's here today to share with us her new book, The Lost Vintage. Now, Ann is a food and travel writer based in Paris and Washington, D.C. She's the author of 2 novels, The Lost Vintage and Kitchen Chinese, a food memoir, Mastering the Art of French Eating, and a cookbook, Instantly French. She contributes regularly to the New York Times travel section, and her articles have appeared in Conde-nast-Traveler, the Best American Traveling Writing for 2017, the New York Times Footsteps, Washingtonian magazine, Vogue, Bon Appetit, Food 52, and many more. So let's welcome to the show, Ann Mah.
Thanks for having me.
Gosh, we were just chatting a little bit ago. I loved your book. It's easy to see why it's getting the rave reviews that it's getting. You know, as an author, you have to be just so happy.
I am. I feel very, very lucky, and it's wonderful to share this story as well as the story of the horizontal collaborators, which is something that has been so overlooked in modern history.
Well, why don't you expand on that a little bit for our listeners? Because when we hear about horizontal collaborators, a lot of people might go, gosh, what's that? You know, how does that all come together?
Mm-hmm. So the book is a historical novel set partially during World War II, and it's really about the legacy of the war in France, the blurring of the line between resistance and occupation, which is something that many, almost every family faced. Some women, after the war, after the liberation, every town and village had troops liberating it, and then that is when the punishments began, the punishments of women who were considered collaborators. The horizontal collaborators were accused of sleeping with the enemy, sleeping with the Nazis, and they were very viciously treated, dragged through the streets, tarred and feathered, beaten, stoned, and very publicly and viciously accused. There was no rule of law. There were no courts. There was no legal system. It was just a mob turning against them. And some of them had indeed collaborated, but it's impossible for us to understand the circumstances. The worst part is that many of them were falsely accused and used as scapegoats.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, it's really interesting when we look at that time in history, especially when we look in France. Because a lot of times people, especially from maybe a U.S. view, they kind of view it as, you know, there wasn't a whole lot going on there. There was an occupation. But your book really brings it to the forefront of what was happening during that time.
Well, I feel like the legacy still lingers in France. You know, as someone who has spends a lot of time there and has lived there, the war is really never something that you bring up in casual conversation. People's memories are generally very, very unhappy, if not, and there's a lot of shame that lingers even to today.
Wow. So why don't we talk, because we're not going to dive too much into The Lost Vintage, because it's a novel and we don't want to give it away. We're not here for spoiler alert. You know? But why don't you share with us your inspiration behind writing this book? Was it finding that piece of history that kind of drove you? So you're kind of finding out more and developing this book?
Yeah, absolutely. I volunteered to pick grapes for the Champagne harvest in 2015, and that was a very physically demanding experience, but wonderful. The camaraderie of sharing this common goal of bringing in the fruit in a limited time frame and making wine from it was one of the most memorable things I've ever done. But while I was in this region, when I have visited Burgundy, the wine region where The Lost Vintage is set, which is so beautiful, so manicured, so cared for, obviously over hundreds of years, I was absolutely astonished by its beauty. But yet there also seemed to be something haunted about these places, both Champagne and Burgundy. And when I started researching a little more, about the history of winemaking and what had happened there during the war, I thought I understood a little better the ghosts that seem to be hovering there.
Well, your book, The Lost Vintage, is is absolutely beautifully written because you bring about, just not the modern times, but it's a very intriguing story and how you combine it with World War II. And you've done just a brilliant job keeping it all together, keeping it flowing, and extremely interesting. Most people, as they read the book, as I was reading the book, I was like, wow, things are happening that you would not expect.
And I think that's a lot about the war as well. People are pressed into circumstances that they can't predict how they will react, how they will behave, and that's and then those choices linger and it can affect future generations.
Well, I can only imagine. I mean, during World War II, you have Germany's invaded. You don't know how long they're going to be there or if they're taking over the country or what's happening. So you're trying to do the best that you can until things change. It's just interesting at that period of time what was going on.
It really is a very fraught and fascinating period of time and a great setting for fiction.
Mm-hmm. So when you were out in the vineyards having fun, getting ready to make champagne, were there some things that really, and working really hard too, were there some things that surprised you that you kind of wove into your book, The Lost Vintage?
Well, I think the actual grape picking process surprised me in that it's much easier to pick a single bunch of grapes than I thought it would be. But as the day stretches on, the physical toil begins to, really cause aches and pains and the bending and stooping. But even while you're doing that, your mind is left free to wander, to, daydream or think about. Your mind is free. So while I felt like I was physically laboring very heavily, working much harder physically than I do in my normal life, for my mental, for my psychological side was just left completely free. It was like a vacation for the mind almost, and that was surprising to me.
That is surprising because you think with such, there's so much going on, you've got a lot of work to do that you wouldn't really kind of have that mental downtime.
And yet you're just the row stretches on, the row of grapes stretches on with and your job is to complete it. And it really, the setting of being in the vineyard, the smells, the sounds of the clipping of the secateurs and the birds, it was for my mental state, it was a wonderful holiday. But at the end of the day, I was really aching.
I bet, because it is a lot of work. I mean, and it has me kind of thinking, gosh, so, I mean, you really kind of went all in when you're doing the research for this book. How long did it take for you to do that?
So I spent about a week picking grapes, and the other part of the grape picking adventure was that I stayed, like most vendangeurs, grape pickers do, I stayed in the vineyard house. I was offered free lodging and meals in exchange for picking grapes. But since I was the only female, I was lodged in this old apartment of the vineyard house that clearly hadn't been lived in since the 1960s. The wallpaper was peeling from the walls. It was completely bare of furniture. There were just a few flickering lights, and my room, the only furniture was a bed that was a hospital bed from the 1950s that shriek. Its springs would just shriek every time I touched it. So even though I was completely exhausted every night, I also managed, my imagination just ran wild, and I became convinced that, in the dead of the night, it's complete country silence, that the place was haunted. And so I ended up sleeping with the lights on, and when I would wake up in the middle of the night, like I would startle myself awake and the bed would shriek, and I would have to write in my journal to sort of calm myself down. The book,
oh my goodness,
was based on that.
Well, you know, and it can feel that way. I mean, here you are in a different place, these beds. I mean, I know you could just see the visual. You paint such a beautiful picture as you do in your book, The Lost Vintage. You know, you paint these beautiful visuals, but this is, you know, the bed's just like basically screaming at you as you're trying to move and just get some rest, you know?
Exactly.
Oh my goodness. That is just too funny. Well, when, you know, it's interesting. I think one thing we can touch on that's not going to be too much of a spoiler alert or anything like that. I mean, in your book, you do, it brings out like family history. And I found it interesting because I think a lot of people can relate to this. When we talk about our family history, how secrets are kept, you know, history is misunderstood. And a lot of times people really don't know what truly happened until they really go digging.
Mm-hmm. I think that's very true. And yes, that is a part of the book. The main character, who is studying to become a master of wine, which is one of the highest distinctions in the wine world, returns to her family's vineyard to prepare for this exam. And while she's there, she lends a hand with the harvest and also is cleaning out the cellar, and discovers an old suitcase filled with artifacts, clothes, and other belongings of a relative she never knew existed. And I think that's really true. You know, that there are people even in my father's family. You know, he had eight siblings, and some of them died before I was born, and I have heard no stories about them. It's not like they did anything bad or are being kept secret, but they just weren't a part of my life growing up as a child. And, you know, those stories may be lost to me. I may never really know who they were. And I think that's true for a lot of people, until you make an effort to go searching through the past or digging through the past, and whether or not that effort is welcomed by your family or not.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? I mean, a lot of times, you know, there can be such misinterpretations based on how people perceive, you know, how the history has been written within a family. And it's really interesting, you know, to have any type of, you know, journals or inner thoughts that kind of, you know, give greater insight. You know, a lot of times people can be very wrong.
It's true. It's true. And everyone has their own perception of the past, of what happened to them, of their own experiences. And also, it's hard for us now to understand the actions of people who were under duress in situations like the occupation.
Yeah, without a doubt. Well, you know, it's interesting. The Lost Vintage, I mean, it's got mystery, it has intrigue, there's love. We're not going to share any part of that because it's just too juicy and too fun. And there's also a section that talks about a secret code. I mean, it's really a thinking person's book in many ways, because it really leaves you kind of guessing on what's happening next.
Mm-hmm. And I wanted to weave in that area, that aura of suspense, that era of mystery, of digging in, of mystery in the past, and using, you know, modern knowledge to try to solve it. That type of book, I've always been a mystery fan. I grew up reading Agatha Christie, and those types of books that are so, you know, sort of shrouded in secrets and codes are very appealing to me.
Well, you've got that in there. That's all we're going to say about that. We're not going to get too much into it, but it's very intriguing, very intriguing. So when readers come across it, they're going to be like, gosh, what is this about? And want to learn more. You know, so your book really does have people kind of on the edge of their seats, wanting to learn what's happening. Yeah, beautiful job writing that. Well, and what's so great, this isn't your only book that you just released. You have another book that you just released as well.
That is right. So while I was rewriting The Lost Vintage and going through several drafts, I had another idea for a book because I do a lot of food writing. And my father had sent me an Instant Pot as a gift. Just as a busy working person, he thought it would make my life easier. And I had the idea to write a French cookbook for the electric pressure cooker. So the book is called Instantly French, and what's really great about it is that pressure cookers are a huge part of modern French culture. In the 70s and 80s, almost every working family had a pressure cooker in their house, and many of my French friends grew up listening to that whistle, and they find it a sort of soothing sound. And so it was great to develop these recipes for the new device, but using sort of some of the older techniques that a lot of my French friends grew up with.
Wow. It is a fabulous book. I mean, it's actually, I think it's a great pairing with The Lost Vintage. You can have
It would make a fun evening, like a book club evening, to pair the two together.
Oh, without a doubt. I have to tell you, I have been eyeing the chicken with mushrooms and cream, and my goodness, that looks decadent.
It actually isn't as rich as it sounds. It just uses a little bit of cream, sour cream, or in France they would use creme fraiche. But it is really easy to make, really just hot comfort food for a winter night. And it's also really good as a chicken pot pie filling.
Oh, well, you got to love that. I mean, it has so many great recipes, and I never even knew you could make all these things in a pressure cooker.
That was a surprise to me, too. One of the things I really loved developing were the desserts, like a flourless chocolate cake or creme brulee and creme caramel. All these desserts that are so much a part of French culture, many of them are baked traditionally made in a bain-marie, a steam bath. But the pressure cooker is a perfect solution to, if you don't feel like, creating the bain-marie, pouring the hot water, putting it in the oven, and slopping water all over the place. The pressure cooker makes it very easy.
Oh, that is fabulous. And it's interesting. You can tell that you've really taken time to go over each of these recipes, that they've been vetted, that they actually, they look fabulous. The book is just amazing. And you could tell that you've taken the time just that it takes to develop these recipes and make sure that they're as fabulous as they look.
Well, that was very important to me, that they work properly, that, because how many times have you seen something in a magazine or, in a cookbook and tried to make it and it didn't turn out? And I know that frustration from that experience. So I really wanted to make sure the recipes were accurate.
Oh, it's easy to see that. I've tried a few things even from Instagram and going, okay, that looks like a pretty picture, but it's a major fail. It's not the case with this book. So what's your favorite recipe in this book, if you had to pick a favorite?
If I had to pick a favorite, there's a Moroccan chickpea soup that I really love. I find the Instant Pot makes chickpeas beautifully. I've never been able to make them as velvety or tender in a traditional, way on the stove or in the oven. And it's a one-pot meal. You cook everything together, the chickpeas, tomatoes, and a spicy harissa sauce. And it's a great meal for, again, a cold winter night. And another one that a lot of people have enjoyed, and I love, and I think is a little bit more unusual, is a pork stew cooked in cider with apples. And that's from the north of France, the Normandy region. They eat a lot of apples. I think their main production is pork, apples, and cream. And these are the three ingredients in this stew, and they all pair really nicely together.
Well, and it's so nice because you're taking from different areas in France into a book that people here can bring, French cuisine into their own home.
And one of the things I love about French country food, is how tied it is to the regions, and how faithful it is to local products from each region. So I think that pork stew is a great example. There's also, like a lamb tagine with prunes from North Africa, which really reflects the history of colonial France and the current and modern France, the ways of immigration that really characterize modern France. And then there's many dishes from the south, from Provence, that are more vegetable and olive oil based. Provençal beans with tomatoes and herbs, and I love that kind of cooking too.
Did it take you a really long time to just do the research? And I'm sure your family loved being tested on with recipes like this. I mean, this stuff looks to die for. But I mean, did it take you a long time to develop this book as well? I mean, because gosh, you had like 2 books pretty much at the same time. It seems that you were developing.
It did take a lot of time, and it took a lot of food, and I was giving away a lot of food during the heat of the recipe testing. But I love French cuisine. My second book was a memoir of French food. It's called Mastering the Art of French Eating, in which I traveled to 10 different regions and researched the history of the signature dish of each of those regions. So I used a lot of that research in this cookbook, but also it's just one of my favorite things to read about and think about and talk to other people about. So it was a labor of love.
Well, you can tell that you did, I mean, my goodness, you did such a fabulous job getting these 2 books developed, The Lost Vintage and Instantly French. They're both perfect as a gift for that special somebody. I mean, there's always birthdays and all sorts of great things that come up, that this is just a wonderful pairing for those foodies and people out there who love to read.
I hope so. I think, as I said, I think it would be a really fun night together to cook like boeuf bourguignon from Instantly French and have a book club discussion about The Lost Vintage.
Oh, and what's great is on your website, and why don't we have you share your website where people can connect with you and be part of your community. You also have kind of like pointers for book clubs. For if someone's a novice and they're just getting together with their friends to read The Lost Vintage, how they can develop that into more of a greater conversation.
Definitely. My website is annmah.net, so just my name.net. And I love having the book club discussion questions on the website. I have people writing to me often saying that they are gathering their friends for an evening and, making cheese puffs, gougere, and having champagne, or making French 75s. And just, I love the way that people come together over this book and celebrate French food.
Well, it's a celebration of 2 books, The Lost Vintage, and also, of course, Instantly French. Ann, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us here today, and of course to share your 2 fabulous books with us.
This is such a treat for me. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Ann. It has been such a pleasure to spend this time with you, and of course to talk about your new book, The Lost Vintage, as well as your cookbook, Instantly French, which I have and I absolutely adore. Again, if you'd like to connect with Ann, you can at her website, annmah.net. We'll have the link below, and make sure to be part of her community and, of course, pick up her great books. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary. A recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.